Quick spoiler warning, this video contains content from the Invincible comics as well as Season 4, so if you're not caught up, you've been warned. Every Invincible fan can agree on one thing. When it comes to Viltrumites, Thragg is the strongest. He's the Grand Regent and the ruler of a dying empire. He's also the physical peak of an entire species bred for war. And on the surface, that's not even debatable. He dominates every Viltrumite we see. He outclasses Nolan, overwhelms entire armies, and when he fights, it doesn't even look like he's trying. It looks like inevitability. But that belief, that Thragg is the strongest, only holds up if you define strength the way Viltrumites do. Because once you step outside of that mindset, once you actually look at the full story, Thragg isn't the strongest. He's something else entirely. He's the final product of a broken system. And the moment that system gets challenged, he stops being the peak and starts becoming the limit. To understand why Thragg was never truly the strongest, you have to understand how Viltrum defines strength. To them, strength isn't complicated. It's power, dominance, and survival. Nothing else matters. Not empathy, adaptability, or any sort of growth beyond pure combat capability. If you can overpower your opponent, you deserve to exist. If you can't, then you don't. That philosophy is what led to the Great Purge, a calculated extermination of their own people. Not because they were losing, but because they wanted perfection. They believed that by eliminating the weak, they could create a species that would never fail. And for a time, it worked. It created warriors like Conquest, Nolan, and ultimately, Thragg. But that perfection came at a cost, because when you define strength in only one way, you lose the ability to recognize anything outside of it. Because Thragg isn't just strong. He was engineered socially, politically, and physically to be the ideal Viltrumite. Everything about him reflects their ideology. Absolute discipline, unshakable belief in dominance, complete emotional detachment. Where someone like Nolan develops an internal conflict, Thragg doesn't hesitate. Where Conquest finds joy in destruction, Thragg sees it as duty. He isn't driven by emotion or ego. He's ultimately driven by purpose. And that makes him terrifying, because he doesn't just represent the strength of Viltrum, he enforces it. Every decision he makes reinforces the same idea. The strong rule, the weak are removed, and the Empire must survive above all else. That's why he rises to Grand Regent, not just because he's the strongest physically, but because he's the purest expression of their ideology. But that purity is also his biggest weakness, because Thragg doesn't evolve. He doesn't need to. He already is what Viltrum wants him to be, which means from the very beginning, he has nowhere to grow. To really understand Thragg's limitations, you have to compare him to other Viltrumites. Let's start with Nolan. On paper, he's inferior to Thragg. He's less disciplined, less loyal, and less ruthless. But Nolan changes. His time on Earth introduces something Viltrum never accounted for: conflict. He begins to hesitate, question, feel, and while that makes him weaker in Viltrum's eyes, it also makes him more adaptable. But then there's Conquest. Conquest represents a different flaw. He's powerful, arguably second only to Thragg for most of the story, but his mindset is completely different. He fights for the love of the game, for enjoyment, and for the thrill of battle. Which means his growth is limited. He doesn't learn from conflict, he indulges in it. That's why even someone like Mark can eventually challenge him, because Conquest isn't evolving. He's just repeating the same process world after world. And that's the key difference between the Viltrumites. They don't grow through understanding, they grow through survival, and that works until survival requires something more than strength. This is where the illusion of Viltrumite superiority collapses, because despite everything they've built, their empire almost gets wiped out by something they can't fight: the Scourge virus, a weapon designed specifically to target them. And it works. Not because the Viltrumites are weak, but because they're too specialized. They optimize their entire existence around combat and around physical dominance. But the moment they face something outside that framework, they had no answer, no adaptability, no countermeasure. No evolution, just collapse. And Thragg, despite being the strongest of them, couldn't stop it. He can fight armies, overpower entire species, but can't overcome something his ideology never prepared him for. That's the moment where strength, as Viltrum defines it, fails. Then there's Mark Grayson, half Viltrumite, half human, and fundamentally different from anything Viltrum has ever produced. Because yes, Viltrumites do evolve. They get stronger through combat, pressure, and survival. But Mark's evolution isn't limited to that. He grows mentally, emotionally, and strategically. He learns from every fight, not just how to win, but why he's fighting in the first place. And that changes everything. Because it means his growth isn't linear, it's adaptive. Where Thragg becomes more efficient within a system, Mark learns how to dominate the system itself. Where conquest repeats the same brutality over and over, Mark finds new ways to overcome it. Where Nolan struggles between two identities, Mark integrates both. He becomes something Viltrum never planned for, a Viltrumite who fights for others. And that creates a completely different kind of strength. Now, to be clear, in a direct, raw comparison of power, Thragg wins. He's stronger, more experienced, and way more refined. But that isn't the argument. The argument is, that's not what defines true strength. Because strength isn't just about who wins a fight. It's about who can continue after it. Who can adapt when the rules change. Who can survive when power alone isn't enough. Thragg represents perfection within a fixed system. Mark represents evolution beyond that system. And when two ideas collide, only one of them can continue forward. Because systems that don't evolve eventually break. And by the end of the story, the strongest Viltrumite isn't the one who dominated or conquered the most. It's the one who redefined what strength means. And that's Mark. Not because he starts stronger than Thragg or because he wins every fight, but because he becomes something Thragg never could. Adaptable. He proves that strength without growth is incomplete, that dominance without evolution is temporary, and that survival isn't about overpowering everything. It's about understanding when power isn't enough. That's why Thragg doesn't represent the peak. He represents the endpoint, the furthest Viltrum could go without changing. Thragg was everything Viltrum wanted: perfect strength, discipline, and execution of their ideology. But that ideology was flawed from the start because it only accounted for one kind of strength, and the moment something challenged that, it collapsed. Which means Thragg was never truly the strongest. He was just the strongest version of a system that was always destined to fail. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe, and suggest new characters you want to see in future videos. Peace.